When the P-47 Thunderbolt first appeared in the skies over Europe, few could have imagined the terror it would soon inspire. At first glance, it was an unlikely champion, bulky, heavy, and almost ungainly compared to the sleek lines of the German Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf 190. Yet this aircraft, affectionately nicknamed the Jug, would rewrite the rules of aerial warfare and become the Luftwaffe's worst nightmare. German pilots were the first to feel its presence. They expected another fragile escort fighter, something they could slash apart in high-speed dives. Instead, they found themselves firing burst after burst into the Jug's armored fuselage, only to watch it keep flying, its radial engine shrugging off punishment that would have doomed most planes. Its durability alone made it an enigma, a machine that seemed to defy destruction. But the Thunderbolt was far more than a flying fortress. Its 850 caliber Browning machine guns spat streams of fire so thick they tore enemy aircraft to pieces in seconds. Even seasoned Luftwaffe aces admitted that one pass from a P-47 could shred a Messerschmitt into flaming wreckage. The skies over France, Belgium, and Germany soon echoed with the roar of Thunderbolts diving like falling giants, guns blazing, leaving German formations in chaos. For bomber crews, the Jug was a savior. Escorting B-17s and B-24s deep into enemy territory, Thunderbolts turned deadly ambushes into desperate retreats. German fighters that once feasted on Allied bombers now found themselves hunted, cut down by escorts that seemed impossible to shake. It was only the beginning. The Luftwaffe, stretched thin by years of attrition, suddenly faced an enemy that could fight on equal terms, endure staggering punishment, and hit back with devastating force. The Jug's arrival marked a turning point in the air war, one that German pilots would remember with dread. And as the legend of the Thunderbolt grew, one thing became clear. This wasn't just another fighter. It was a symbol of American industrial might and resilience. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of World War II. The secret to the Thunderbolt's fearsome reputation wasn't just its firepower, it was its indestructibility. Where most fighters of the war relied on speed and maneuverability to survive, the P-47 brought something new to the battlefield: brute strength. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine was housed inside a thick armored shell, capable of absorbing punishment that would have turned a lighter machine into twisted debris. German pilots quickly learned that the usual tactics didn't work. Strafing passes and high-angle bursts often peppered the Jug with holes, but it kept flying, smoke trailing, wings still level, guns still blazing. There are countless stories of Thunderbolts limping home with shredded wings, shot-out controls, or even entire cylinders blown apart, only to land safely on Allied airstrips. For every Jug destroyed, several Luftwaffe fighters often paid the price. This resilience gave Allied pilots an invaluable psychological edge. They climbed into the cockpit with the confidence that their machine could take a beating and still bring them back alive. Luftwaffe veterans, by contrast, began to view the Thunderbolt as a foe that simply refused to die. Every encounter risked draining their fuel, expending ammunition, and leaving them vulnerable to another ambush. But toughness alone didn't explain its dominance. At over 10,000 pounds fully loaded, the Jug was one of the heaviest single-engine fighters of the war. That bulk carried not only armor, but also fuel, giving it the endurance needed to escort bombers deep into Germany. As the air war stretched into longer and more dangerous missions, endurance became as crucial as firepower, and the Thunderbolt had both. The Luftwaffe's once terrifying raids on Allied bombers began to crumble. Even when German aces scored hits, Thunderbolts soaked up the punishment, reformed their escorts, and returned fire with merciless precision. The sky, once dominated by sleek German interceptors, was slowly becoming a battlefield where stubbornness, durability, and sheer presence mattered more than elegance. For the Germans, this realization was chilling. They weren't just fighting a fighter plane. They were fighting a fortress in the sky, a machine designed to endure their best and then strike back harder. If the Jug's armor made it a fortress, its armament made it a predator. The P-47 carried 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, capable of unleashing a storm of fire unlike anything the Luftwaffe had faced. Each gun spat out heavy rounds at blistering speed, and when combined, they produced a torrent that could rip through aircraft, vehicles, and even light armor with terrifying ease. German pilots learned quickly that a head-on approach was suicide. A single burst from the Thunderbolt's guns filled the air with lead, saturating the space around enemy fighters and leaving almost no room for escape. Luftwaffe veterans, who once relied on split-second maneuvers to dodge enemy fire, found themselves shredded in an instant. The Jug didn't need finesse. It simply overwhelmed. Bomber crews adored this firepower. Thunderbolts broke apart, attacking German formations before they could even reach the bombers. Many B-17 and B-24 pilots later credited the Jug with saving thousands of lives, not because it flew the most elegant patterns, but because its wall of gunfire created an impenetrable shield. But the Jug's 8 guns weren't limited to the skies. When fitted with bombs or rockets, the P-47 transformed into a flying artillery piece. Strafing runs over German convoys became nightmares as lines of trucks, tanks, and supply trains were shredded by concentrated machine gun fire. The Luftwaffe, already overwhelmed in the air, now had to watch their ground forces torn apart from above. Pilots relished the raw, destructive power. One American ace described it bluntly. With 850s, you didn't need to be precise. You just pointed and erased whatever was in front of you. The psychological toll on the Germans was immense. Facing the Jug meant facing not just a dogfight, but a weapon that dominated every dimension of the battlefield. Whether in the skies or on the ground, its 8 guns of doom were relentless, leaving destruction in their wake. For the Luftwaffe, it was a chilling realization. No matter where they turned, the Jug's firepower followed. And it was only the beginning of their nightmare. The P-47 Thunderbolt earned its name not only for its firepower, but for the way it struck, like a thunderbolt falling from the sky. Its sheer weight, combined with the immense power of its radial engine, gave it a diving speed that few aircraft could match. When a Jug nosed down, it plummeted like a falling star, screaming toward its target with terrifying velocity. German pilots soon learned to dread these dives. A Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf could twist and climb, but when a Thunderbolt committed to a dive, it became almost untouchable. Luftwaffe fighters that tried to follow often tore their wings apart or stalled in the thin air, while the Jug stabilized, rode the descent, and unleashed its 8 guns in devastating passes. The sound of a P-47 diving became a warning of sudden death. This ability made the Jug not only a fearsome dogfighter, but also one of the most effective ground attack aircraft of the war. Strafing German convoys, smashing armored columns, and ripping apart railway lines, the Thunderbolt turned mobility into vulnerability for the Reich. Tanks that once ruled the battlefield now found themselves burning under hailstorms of bullets and rockets delivered from above. Even more, the Jug's rugged frame allowed pilots to dive lower and strike harder than their opponents. They could push through flak bursts, shrug off hits, and still climb away to safety. For German troops on the ground, the sight of Thunderbolts circling overhead felt like an executioner's shadow, inescapable and merciless. To the Allies, this was a revolution. Air power was no longer just about protecting bombers or winning duels high above the clouds. The Jug had brought the battlefield into 3 dimensions, striking with precision, durability, and unrelenting force. For the Luftwaffe, this was a nightmare that never ended. Even when they avoided the Jug in the air, its wrath followed them to the ground. And every dive, every strike, every roar of its engine reminded them, the Thunderbolt wasn't just a fighter, it was a storm falling with unstoppable fury. By 1943, the skies over Europe had become a battlefield of endurance. American bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, were the hammer-striking Germany's war machine. But these bombers needed a shield, a guardian to see them through swarms of Luftwaffe fighters waiting like wolves on the hunt. That guardian became the P-47 Thunderbolt. At first, the Jug's short range limited its reach. It could not follow bombers deep into German territory. Yet where it could go, it became a wall of steel. Its 8 guns shredded interceptors before they could tear into bomber formations. Luftwaffe pilots who once attacked with boldness now hesitated, knowing that every approach might end in a blaze of tracer fire. As drop tanks extended its range, the Thunderbolt's shadow stretched further. Bomber crews began to cheer at the sight of those broad, rugged wings sliding into escort position beside them. To the men inside the flying fortresses, the Jug wasn't just an aircraft, it was a promise. A promise that they would not die alone, that someone would fight beside them as they crossed enemy skies. For the Germans, this shifted the balance. The Jagdgeschwader, once confident in their ambushes, now found themselves outgunned, outlasted, and outflown. The Thunderbolt's presence made every raid more costly, every interception more dangerous. Even the famed Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s struggled to break bomber boxes guarded by Jugs diving in with relentless fury. But the Jug was more than a shield. In escort missions, its pilots often broke formation to chase German fighters, hunting them across the sky with ruthless efficiency. What began as defense turned into dominance. Every mission worn down the Luftwaffe a little more, draining fuel, pilots, and machines they could not replace. The escort role defined the Jug's legacy in Europe. It wasn't glamorous duels that crushed the Luftwaffe. It was relentless pressure, day after day, raid after raid, with the Thunderbolt soaring beside the giants. And for the men on both sides, one truth became clear. Where the bombers flew, the Jug would be there. And when the Jug was there, survival was far from certain. If the skies belonged to the Thunderbolt, the ground soon felt its wrath even more. By 1944, the P-47 had earned another role, one that turned it into the bane of Germany's armies: ground attack. Armed with bombs, rockets, and its fearsome 50-caliber machine guns, the Jug transformed from a bomber escort into a flying sledgehammer, strafing columns of trucks, smashing tanks, torching trains. The P-47 left trails of destruction that stretched for miles across occupied Europe. German soldiers gave it a new name, Der Schlachtflugzeug, the strike aircraft. But in whispers, they had another, Der Todesengel, the angel of death. Its sheer durability made it perfect for low-level strikes. Where lighter fighters might have been shredded by flak, the Jug could take staggering punishment and still claw its way home. Stories spread of Thunderbolts landing with holes in their wings, cylinders blown apart, even tails half destroyed. The Luftwaffe may have feared its firepower, but German ground troops came to dread the sound of its diving engine, a roar that meant death from above. Pilots embraced this new mission with a grim determination. They flew low over hedgerows and rivers, their cockpits vibrating as machine guns spat fire into enemy convoys. With rockets slamming into armored formations and bombs cratering supply lines, the Jug became a weapon not just of air superiority, but of annihilation. It was enough to clear the skies. Allied commanders wanted Germany's war machine dismantled piece by piece, and the P-47 delivered. Rail yards exploded, bridges collapsed, tanks burned where they stood. The Thunderbolt cut the arteries that fed Hitler's war, leaving divisions stranded and supply lines shattered. Luftwaffe fighters, stretched thin, could rarely intervene. On the ground, the German soldier learned a harsh lesson. Even if the skies were silent at any moment, the Jug might appear. And when it did, survival wasn't a question of bravery. It was only a matter of luck. The P-47 had become more than an aircraft. It was a force of nature. In the villages and fields of Europe, its legend was written in smoke, fire, and ruin. By late 1944, The war in the air had shifted beyond numbers. It had shifted into psychology. For the Luftwaffe, every encounter with the P-47 Thunderbolt was another chip carved from their will to fight. German pilots knew the Jug was not just another enemy fighter. It was a machine designed to absorb punishment and still press the attack. A Bf-109 or FW-190 could strike, but killing a Thunderbolt outright was rare. Too often, the Jug would limp home, trailing smoke, its pilot waving defiantly as if mocking the enemy. For German airmen, this resilience was soul-crushing. They could no longer count on firepower alone to even the odds. On the ground, morale sank even lower. Soldiers watched as Thunderbolts carved through armored formations, leaving burning hulks of panzers in their wake. Supply columns vanished in bursts of fire. Railways, the veins of German logistics, lay twisted and broken. Even the most disciplined troops began to see the Jug not as a plane, but as an omen, the promise of defeat delivered from the skies. Inside Germany, propaganda tried desperately to paint the Thunderbolt as slow, clumsy, and inferior. But soldiers at the front whispered the truth. No aircraft could take so much damage, deliver so much destruction, and return again and again. The Jug's presence became an unshakable shadow, looming over every battlefield. For the Luftwaffe's leadership, the numbers told an even darker story. Their best pilots were gone, their replacements inexperienced, their fuel reserves dwindling. Against this backdrop, the Thunderbolt seemed invincible. Its 8 machine guns were not simply tearing apart aircraft, they were shredding German morale. By the final months of 1944, Luftwaffe squadrons no longer launched to dominate the skies. They launched to survive, to delay the inevitable, to cling to what little honor they had left. Every roar of a Thunderbolt S. Pratt & Whitney engine reminded them that the tide had turned permanently. The Luftwaffe had once terrified Europe. Now, it was the one haunted by a fighter too powerful to stop and too relentless to ignore. The Jug had become the nightmare they could not wake from. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the P-47 Thunderbolt stood as one of the most formidable symbols of American air power. To many who flew it, the Jug was more than an aircraft. It was a guardian, a partner, and a weapon that never failed them. Its legacy was written not only in victories, but in survival. Thousands of pilots owed their lives to its thick armor, radial engine, and sheer toughness. Stories echoed across airfields, Jugs returning with wings shredded, cockpits peppered with holes, engines coughing yet still carrying their pilots home. For Allied crews, the Thunderbolt was not just reliable, it was indestructible. Historians often compare the Jug to sleeker, faster fighters like the Mustang or Spitfire. But the Thunderbolt carved its place through a different kind of dominance. It was a warplane that excelled in multiple roles: escort, interceptor, and devastating ground attacker. No German aircraft matched its ability to protect bombers by day and smash tanks by dusk. Its versatility became its secret weapon. For the Luftwaffe, the Jug's legacy was far darker. Pilots remembered it as a beast that could not be slain, a predator that stalked their skies relentlessly. Ground troops recalled its thundering dives and the spray of machine gun fire that seemed impossible to escape. The very sight of its broad silhouette overhead was enough to sap confidence from entire divisions. Beyond the battlefield, the Thunderbolt's impact was strategic. By crippling German industry and strangling supply lines, it helped ensure the collapse of the Reich's ability to fight. More than bombs, more than tanks, it was air supremacy, driven by aircraft like the Jug, that sealed the outcome of the war. Today, the P-47 remains a reminder of how durability, firepower, and innovation can turn the tide of history. It may not have been the fastest or the prettiest, but it was the fighter that the enemy feared most. For the Luftwaffe, the Jug was more than a nightmare. It was the sound of defeat roaring through the skies, a thunder that marked the end of their dominance forever.